With Connor McGovern's future in Buffalo uncertain, what's the plan for the Bills at center? I have plenty of ideas that I'm going to share with you right now on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, folks, welcome in. We spent the last couple of days really diving into wide receivers. Players the Bills could trade for, players the Bills could sign in free agency, and well, the Bills have other needs to address as well. So we're going to move on at this point and today focus on centers. We'll get to left guards. We'll get to edge rushers and nose tackles and linebackers and safeties. But next up, I want to talk about the plan at center and the options that the Bills could explore through veterans to shore up the position. And what's really fascinating about this offseason in general for the Bills is that they do have a lot of needs. We discussed this earlier in the week in the podcast I did outlining Brandon Beane's to-do list. And the reality is the Bills cannot invest significantly to fill every need. They can't. They'll need to have some economic options along the way. And so, as part of my plan, I want to share with you both some big fish options at center and some sleepers, if you will. One thing that I will point out as we consider Brandon Beane and him getting set to come up with the right plan at center is that, to his credit, he's done pretty well. Since 2019, the center position has been solidified courtesy of two great moves that he made. The first one in 2019, ahead of the 2019 season, signing Mitch Morse, and then signing Connor McGovern. It's been terrific. Those are two very good veteran free agent signings that Beane made, and that position has been well taken care of since 2019. And that does give me a level of confidence about what it will look like moving forward because he has gotten this right. Obviously, the reason we're even discussing this is that Connor McGovern, the Bills' starting center, is an expiring contract. And the expectations are that he's going to demand a pretty big payday. And I've listened to Connor McGovern on some podcasts recently, one with Eric Wood, one with the guys from Cover One, including one last year during the season, where the contract has been discussed. And Connor McGovern has simultaneously shared how much he loves playing for the Bills, but also not shy about reminding everyone that it's a business. And one thing he said last year on the Cover One podcast was that he took less in free agency to come to Buffalo. And this feels like a guy who isn't going to make any concessions. He's had two great seasons in a row at the center position, back-to-back seasons allowing 0 sacks. He's only allowed 2 quarterback hits over the last 2 years. He hasn't missed games. I know he's looking for a big payday. He's earned $28 million so far in his career, and I know that's a ton of money, right? That's a ton of money. But the opportunity that he has with this next deal can double that, probably more. And I'm sure he's going to take advantage of this opportunity. There have been 3 recent deals, in fact, last year, at the center position that has really pushed the top of the market. You had Creed Humphrey with the Chiefs sign a contract that pays him $18 million a season. Cam Jurgens with the Eagles signed a contract that pays him $17 million a season. Boy, I think that's an overpay after watching his tape. And then Drew Dahlman with the Bears signed at $14 million. Previously, the best centers were getting paid like $12 million a season. It was a big deal when they finally went north of 10. Like this has escalated very quickly. And I mention that because I do think it does complicate the options for Buffalo. And it certainly elevates what Connor McGovern can expect on this deal. So you've seen the center market really go up. You've seen some big contracts, and there's also a big need across the league. There are several teams that need a starting center. Just kind of looking through them, I would identify the Bills, the Ravens, the Browns, the Lions, and the Panthers as teams that flat out need a starting center. I would also add 4 more teams to the mix of teams that I would not be surprised to see them seek an upgrade. The New England Patriots, the Los Angeles Rams, the New York Giants, the Las Vegas Raiders. I could see all of those teams looking to improve on what they have, not to mention the 5 teams, including some contenders, Ravens, Lions, Bills, that flat out need a starting center. So let's get into some of the options, and I want to start with the in-house options. Then in segment 2, we'll talk about the big fish options, and then this mix of players that I think are very interesting that the Bills could explore as well. But in-house, you're looking at 2 players, Sedrick Van Pran-Granger and Alec Anderson. Now, Sedrick Van Pran-Granger was a 2024 fifth-round pick by the Bills out of Georgia. He turns 25 in October. There's 2 years remaining on his rookie deal. I was a big fan of him in college. Big-time pedigree, started a ton of games, was a team captain, had good tape against SEC competition. I liked what I saw from him in the 2024 preseason. Of course, we didn't get a chance to see him this preseason because he had the calf injury. But he did start in Week 18 against the Jets, and I liked a lot of what he did. The one concern that I have with Sedrick Van Pran-Granger is his arm length. And I know that arm length isn't a huge deal at center, but he has really short arms, 31 3/8 on the arm length, which is the 5th percentile for centers. And go back and watch that Week 18 game, and you will see times where Van Pran-Granger struggles to get his hands on guys because he's outreached. Guys are able to get into his pads, and he's not able to get his hands on their pads, and therefore he can't control the block. It happens. And I'm sure as he gains experience and reps, he'll learn how to overcome that. But it's my biggest concern with him. He's plenty strong. He can move. I think he's got the football IQ. But can he overcome the arm length to the point where it's not going to be detrimental to him being consistent with his execution? I would like to think that the Bills have a good read on him. They've been around him for the last couple of years and should have a good idea as to what type of path he's on, and if he's a viable answer to be Josh Allen's next starting center. Would be great. I mean, this would be awesome. If Sedrick Van Pran-Granger is the guy and it works out, that would be a huge hit and a necessary hit. As we've also had conversations this week about the draft rut that Brandon Beane is currently in. Converting a 5th-round pick into a good center from the 2024 class would be awesome, especially when you're staring at the top pick from that draft being Keon Coleman, and that's not looking so hot. And you also have Dwayne Carter as your 3rd-round pick, and it's just like you need some hits here. Right now it's Cole Bishop and Ray Davis. It would be huge. So he's in the mix. And when I get to segment 3, a lot of the players that I want to discuss there will be guys that I think would come in and compete with Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. There is no world where you enter this season and he is your assumed starter. There's no way that could be the case. And so later on, I want to discuss players that can come in and represent competition. The other in-house guy is Alec Anderson. He turns 27 in October. The thing about Alec Anderson is that he is an expiring contract. He is a restricted free agent. So the Bills could tender him for $3.5 million, which I think is probably too much. And ideally, you would maybe just extend him or sign him to a new contract for a lower amount. We'll see what the league thinks of him. Maybe somebody out there looks at Alec Anderson and says, boy, we got to have him, right? This is a Ryan Bates situation, if you will. I have a lot of questions about Alec Anderson as a potential starting center. I think he's a fine reserve, a good utility blocker, but to ask him to be your every down center, I think is a little aggressive. I like him in the run game a lot more than pass pro. He's a very aggressive player and aggressive to a fault. Aggressive to the point where I think he's a little bit frenetic. And when you're that way, it's hard for you to latch and sustain on blocks, right? Because you're herky-jerky and you're just not under control with enough consistency. You're not rooted. You're not sitting on your hips. And I find that to be problematic with Alec Anderson when I watch him play. Furthermore, Jerry Ostrowski, my partner for Bill Squad, and you're going to hear a lot more from Jerry on this podcast coming up. Nothing changes with me. You're still going to get everything you always get from me, but we're going to do a little bit of extra stuff together. Jerry Ostrowski, who started over 100 games for the Bills, offered this quote on Bill Squad a few weeks ago regarding the idea of Alec Anderson at center. He said, quote, "I want a reliable center. I personally don't think Alec Anderson is that guy. I don't think he has the mentality to play center. He's got to be chill under pressure, and he's an off-the-rails kind of player that plays with a lot of emotion. Centers can't be the guy who's always looking for a fight, so let's take that off the board." I think those are fair concerns from somebody who knows. So I'm not in love with the idea, and of course I would say the same thing about Alec Anderson as I did Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. If this is an option, it has to be coupled with significant competition. Again, there's no world where Alec Anderson can be your assumed starter at center in 2026. So those are the in-house guys. Coming up next, I want to get into some of the big fish that are potentially going to be available in free agency. So we'll explore that next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you a chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it can also send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, folks, welcome back in. Let's talk about some of these bigger ticket options the Bills could explore in free agency. And I actually want to start with Connor McGovern, who turns 29 in November. I already kind of shared some of the things in segment one about how he's not allowed a sack in 2 years at center, has allowed 2 quarterback hits, hasn't missed time. He's a good football player. There's nothing about Connor McGovern, the football player, that has me concerned about his future in the NFL. I think he's going to continue to be a quality starting center in the NFL. The conversation really comes down to money and resource allocation, which will be true for the players I'm going to talk about in this segment. Is this where you want to invest big dollars? Because you can't invest big dollars at center, at receiver, at edge, you can't do it all. So how do you get through it? That's what Brandon Beane has to figure out. But if they do want to invest heavily at center, I think you start by simply bringing back Connor McGovern, right? That's a guy with proof of concept, speaks the same language as Josh Allen, has been a starting center for the last 2 years. Like, it's not hard to convince me that if you're going to invest big money at the center position, give it to Connor McGovern. Spot Rack estimates McGovern gets $16 million a season. PFF says 13. I bet you it's above 13. I think it's probably around 15. And I would expect him to test the waters. I'd be pretty surprised if before the new league year starts that you hear about a Connor McGovern extension. I think for him, money's going to be a big part of this. And I think he's going to want to see what's out there for him. And I do have a level of fear that he's going to find what he's looking for. It could be from a rival team like the Ravens or the Patriots. Could see the Lions really wanting Connor McGovern. Let's talk about a player that I think really has no chance of going to the Bills, but I think he's an important player to discuss in this center conversation, and that's Tyler Linderbaum from the Ravens. He was a 2022 first-round pick of the Ravens. He turns 26 in April. He's an elite center, top tier, maybe the best in the league, certainly a top 3 center. I think he will top $20 million a season. I think that's out of the Bills' price range. Pro Football Focus estimates $20 million a season. Spot Rack says 18. I bet you he tops 20. And so the reason I'm bringing him up is not necessarily because I think he's a true target for the Bills, but he's very relevant in this center conversation. If the Bills are going to land a big fish, domino one is probably Linderbaum signing where he's going to sign and see how high that top of the market can push at the position, and then everyone else will fall underneath. And Linderbaum on the open market, like this is a pretty rare type situation where a player of this caliber at this age would hit the market. And I expect there to be some money out there from him. I think he'll get every bit of the $20 million he's looking for a season. A couple more players I want to mention here. Next up is Dylan Parham from the Raiders. Was a 2022 third-round pick of the Raiders. He turns 27 in August. He has been a 4-year starter for Vegas. 64 starts across his 4 seasons. I'm a big fan of his, or I was a big fan of his coming out of Memphis. Super athletic, can play all 3 spots on the interior. And I thought he played really well his last season at Memphis at center. He was a guard there for his first 3, played center his final season. So far in the league, he's played mostly guard for the Ravens. In fact, only 219 of his 3,800 career snaps have been at center. I would say that maybe this past season wasn't his best, and maybe it's a little bit of the Osiris Torrance conversation where young, productive right away, but you haven't seen a ton of growth. To which I would say, look at the circumstances of Vegas. Right? Like these clowns, they hired Chip Kelly to be their offensive coordinator and shook up their offensive line, and like everybody regressed on that offense. So I don't know that it's a great measuring stick of like truly what Parham's capable of, because I think he's a good player. He might be one of those guys that's just a better player somewhere else. Remember the drought era Bills where they had guys and you just like, yeah, this is a decent player, but you just know they're going to go somewhere else and be a lot better. This is Dylan Parham with the Raiders. And that to me makes him a pretty attractive option in free agency. Pro Football Focus estimates $13 million a season. Spot Rack says 10. I'll also share that Bills quarterbacks coach Bo Hardigree was with the Raiders in 2022 and 2023. So the year they drafted him and his second season where he was a starter. So there's some intel there. I'll say this, like, to me, the dollars really matter here. If he's going to be 10 to 13 million a season, I might say, well, just give McGovern 14 or 15 and get it done. But I'm not totally convinced that he pushes the top of this range. Like, if you told me Dylan Parham was an $8 million a year center, I don't know if I'd be surprised. And I also think that this is a relevant player to consider in the left guard conversation. So file that away in the back of your mind for left guard options. I'm talking about him as a center, but certainly could be in the mix for left guard. Super athletic. And that's a trait of Sean Payton, Joe Brady, Pete Carmichael centers, his athleticism at center. And Parham certainly checks that box. Want to mention one more player here in the big fish bucket, and that is Cade Mays from the Carolina Panthers. He turns 27 in April, was a 6th-round pick by the Panthers in 2022. started 27 games so far in the NFL across 4 seasons, 12 last year, 8 in 2024, and then a handful in his first 2 seasons. I think he has really settled in. Was a big-time recruit in high school. He played at Georgia and Tennessee, like a 5-star. Kept bouncing around from different positions. You watched him, you could see a lot of talent, but he was really uneven with how he performed on tape. Kind of aggressive to a fault, particularly at tackle. And he since came to Carolina, and I think he's played his best football at center. Started, like I said, 12 games this year. Austin Corbett was their starter, and he went down, and then, Cade Mays came in, and I thought played well. Played well to the point where I think he's going to be signed by some team to be a starting center. Pro Football Focus says 1 year, $4.5 million. That's pretty attractive. And SpotRack says $12.3 million a season. So a massive discrepancy here. Obviously, the market is the market. Like, we'll see what somebody's willing to pay, but I think you look at a guy like Cade Mays as a potential starter, and obviously we'll see what's out there for him. But as there's a lot of need, maybe that helps the Bills get a guy like this if that's the direction they want. This feels like a big fish, but maybe not the biggest fish. I don't know that he pushes that 12.3 that SpotRack says. But he's definitely a player that I'm intrigued by the possibility of him coming to the Bills. All right, coming up next, there are several players, 5 additional players that I want to discuss that are experienced players in the NFL, that are free agents, that I think could be signed to compete with Sedrick Van Pran-Granger and maybe win the job. So we have some sleepers to get into next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Welcome to the 5-Hour Energy Flavor Draft. We're looking at every aspect of the draft to let you know which tasty flavors are the best and which just might be sleepers. The board is set, the flavors are ready, and only one is going to take that top spot. 5-Hour Energy has a wide variety of flavors, something for everyone. My favorite player, the number one pick for me, is berry. You get that big, bold berry flavor, slightly sweet and fruity. You get that classic mix of raspberry and blackberry, which I love. It's smooth and sweet, but not overly sugary. The other flavor I want to shout out as a sleeper, not my number one pick, but one I really like, strawberry banana. It's a classic combination that consistently delights. So find your new favorite flavor of 5-Hour Energy shots available online at 5hourenergy.com or Amazon. All right, folks, let's talk about some sleepers. I've tried to stress that there's going to be some holes that are filled with more economic options. And I want to share some of those possibilities with you right now at center, where I'm not sure you would sign any of these players and say, you're our starter. But I think they'd be tremendous competition for Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. And you have a true battle and somebody wins. And I think you can be convinced that any of these guys could work. So let's dive into these guys. Let's start with a familiar name, Ryan Bates. Remember that guy? He's most recently played for the Bears. He turns 20. He actually just turned 29 in February. He hasn't played much for the Bears. Of course, he started like 14 games in 2023 for the Bills. The last 2 years with the Bears, he has only started 2 games. And both of those in 2024. Obviously, he knows Josh Allen. Remember the whole Rick Bates thing? He's versatile, right? He can, if he's not your starting center, and Sedrick Van Pran-Granger is, Ryan Bates can play all the spots. So you have a natural succession plan for Alec Anderson. And I don't think he'll, if Alec Anderson gets that $3.5 million, I think Ryan Bates comes in for less than that. I think Ryan Bates might be around a $2 million a year player. So he shouldn't be expensive. He kind of knows your situation, has proof of concept starting for you. Like, this is a pretty interesting idea. So Ryan Bates, a potential option to compete with Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. How about this one? Luke Fortner. Played with the Saints this past year. He turns 28 in May. Was a third-round pick of the Jaguars in 2022 and the 65th pick in the draft. So that's a pretty high third-round pick. So his first 2 years, he starts every game for Jacksonville, 2022 and 2023. And then, of course, Jacksonville, obviously I've had some turnover there. And as I've tried to stress to you, as regimes change, so do players, right? Every GM wants their guys in the building. And so Luke Fortner, ahead of this season, was traded to the Saints. And Luke Fortner went on to start 10 games after Eric McCoy got hurt. Now, one thing I'll say about Luke Fortner is I think he's a center only. That's probably a knock against him, where if you sign him and he's not your starter, I don't think he gives you that true reserve capacity at guard. But he's basically had 3 years of starting experience, high pedigree. I think it's a reasonable player to consider as competition for Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. The next guy, Matt Hennessy, played this past season with the 49ers, was a 2020 third-round pick of the Falcons out of Temple. I really liked him at Temple. Super athletic. He turns 29 in November. He's had an interesting path in the NFL. Like I said, he was drafted in the third round by Atlanta, and he was drafted to replace Alex Mack, who was a tremendous center for them for a number of years. And so in 2021, he did that. He replaced Alex Mack, and he had a great season. It looked like he was going to be the answer. He looked awesome. And then, unfortunately, at the end of 2022, he got hurt. And then at the beginning of 2023, he also got hurt. And Drew Dahlman steps in, who eventually signs the big contract with the Bears. There's not a spot for him at guard because they have Chris Lindstrom and Matthew Bergeron. And so he just gets lost in the sauce. This happens, right? You get hurt, somebody else steps in, and all of a sudden you don't have a spot. He was a reserve last season for the 49ers. He did start, I think, one game there at the end of the year. He's interesting to me because before that injury, it looked like this was going to be a good center in the league. Gives you that guard center flexibility. Over 1,300 snaps at center, 235 at guard. Again, competition for Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. Potential starter, decent path for low cost. The next guy, Cole Strange, played this past season with the Dolphins. He turns 28 in July, was a first-round pick of the Patriots in 2022 out of UT Chattanooga, the Monarchs. I loved watching him play at UT Chattanooga. I remember putting on that tape. You see him, he's got like this like classic face mask that you don't see anybody, like the split face mask. And he's getting after people. Super, super rangy player. And so he winds up being a first-round pick of the Patriots in 2022. Started, looked solid, and then in 2023, he tears his patella tendon. Came back late in 2024 for New England, starts 2 games at center after he was a guard for them initially. And then, of course, they switch regimes. Cole Strange, I think he actually signed to the Browns practice squad. And then Miami signed him, and he started 14 games for them last year at guard. But I think myself and a lot of people, when you watch him at UT Chattanooga and you seen him at the Senior Bowl, you thought to yourself, I think he's got a future at center. And the Patriots started to tap into that. And I think it's a reasonable idea. So one of the good things about Cole Strange, if you sign him and he doesn't win the job, he can provide versatility in terms of in a reserve role at both center and guard. One more player I'll shout out, Andre James, played this past season with the Chargers. He turns 28 in May. He's had an interesting story as well. A 2019 undrafted free agent out of UCLA by the Raiders. In 2021, he becomes their starting center. And he signs a 3-year, $12.5 million deal. He starts every game in 2022, every game in 2023. And then they signed him to an extension, a 3-year, $24 million extension in the 2024 offseason. Like 2 contracts with this team. You think he's on this path to being a fixture at center. And then they released him the following offseason. And then he spent this past year as a reserve for the Chargers. Like, went from being a good starting center to cut to being a backup for a division rival. And that's what happens when you have, I think the Raiders had probably 3 GMs during Andre James's time with the Raiders. And so when that happened, like I keep trying to tell you, GMs change, everything changes. And so you saw that happen with Andre James, who has started a lot of games in the league. He's been a paid center in the league. Turns 28 in May, so he's not like 100 years old. So he would be interesting. Another note on him, Bills quarterbacks coach Bo Hardigree was the quarterbacks coach in 2022 when he was the full-time starting center. And he was also, Hardigree was the interim offensive coordinator in 2023, his next season as a starter for the Raiders. So another player where there's some intel with the Bills coaching staff. So there you have it. Hopefully this was what you found to be a very comprehensive conversation about the Bills situation at center, the league's situation at center, and then a wide range of different options the Bills could explore to get this right. There you have it, folks. Appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.